Hello, everyone. So I wanted to do a video in response to the second State of the Union that Trump gave yesterday. So two quick points before I dive into the article. Um, you know, I give Trump credit to a degree on this, even though I almost want to say the media should be doing a better job at this. They they let Trump get away with too much, and I think that Trump he can lie unlike any other politician that I know of. Obviously, like they all lie, at least occasionally. They all either slip up or whatever it might be, but Trump is just so brazen, and according to him, like everything in the country is the best it's ever been right now with him in charge. So, I mean, just like it's so brazen and crazy that it's almost like they don't call him out on that because I guess it should be obvious. But I think the problem with how the media covers Trump is they have the neutrality bias a lot of the time, and they just kind of want to, and maybe that's because the people that are in mainstream media, a lot of them are just centrists at heart, and they're just like, "Ooh, I think both sides have something to say," or whatever. So they they don't reframe the debate, I should say, because Trump's framing of the country right now is just so off. I mean, you know, for a lot of people, America is not doing too great right now. It's not this rosy picture that Trump painted. So I wish that people in the media would shape the reality more. And I think they think that that would be going too far for them and they'd be like too partisan. But no, your job is just to point out the objective reality and show the bigger picture. And that's the thing that Trump lacked. And which leads to my other point. Like, he wheels out these anecdotal examples. Now, mind you, certain ones I kind of do give a pass on, like the nonviolent drug offenders. And he brought one that was released under his watch, another who was a drug dealer, but they were nonviolent. So, like I can't even complain about that. Like that's the right thing to do. We shouldn't be locking up nonviolent drug offenders. And it's like Trump should go further. He should, um, or I guess you would have to order the DEA to do this, but take marijuana off this Schedule One. It shouldn't be on the same level as narcotics. It's ridiculous. Um, so yeah, he could be doing more, but yeah, that's the right direction. But the problem is anecdotal examples like it doesn't it shouldn't work that way because you bring some random army dudes that are super old. Like I'm not saying like it's bad because they're old, but just like random people for no reason, and it's like let's stand up and applaud for you, or some ICE agent or border agent. I don't know. Like it just that doesn't that's not a point within itself. Like the anecdotal examples, like it doesn't give the whole picture. Like he brought a 10-year-old cancer survivor, I believe it was, and talk about like, oh, we're great for healthcare, like things are going great. Millions of Americans are uninsured now, more so than they were under Obama. That number of uninsured is going up under Trump, and Republicans, they vote to take away your healthcare rights. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, he brags about it in that same speech. He talked about repealing the individual mandate. Now, mind you, I'm not in, I don't like private insurance. This is why I don't think Obamacare was perfect. It was far from perfect because it kept the root of the problem in place. But you can't deny that Obamacare as a whole, it helped get more people health insurance. That's the facts. That's those are the numbers. So I just wish we could do away with the anecdotal stuff and just talk about real data, the overall picture. Because you take one isolated story, it's not necessarily going to match up with the reality for people as a whole. So let's go to Al Jazeera. They did a pretty good breakdown of this speech. So Trump's primetime address in Washington, D.C. comes at a critical moment in his presidency. He pushed his party into a record-long government shutdown over border security, only to give in to Democrats. With another shutdown deadline looming, the president has few options for getting Congress to fund a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. He did not make good on his threats to declare a national emergency, which would allow him to circumvent Congress to obtain the needed funds to build the border wall. Doing so would risk further alienating his party and would certainly throw up immediate legal challenges. So, last video I talked about the government shutdown. It was the longest in our history at the time. It still is, yeah. But it's over now. It's temporarily over because Trump caved to the Democrats, which that in itself is kind of crazy because it's like you just gave in to the Democrats anyway, so why did we have to go through that month-long shutdown where you gave federal workers financial uncertainty? I mean, yeah, the whole theory, like they get paid as soon as the government opens again, but if you're talking about potentially months on end, and it was about a month, you're talking about potentially having to give up paying a bill because you don't have the money. This is what it comes down to. A lot of them work paycheck to paycheck. So that was not a moral thing to do, you could certainly say. I mean, Trump acts like he's the moral arbiter of all this. Like any issue, it's like he has the moral high ground, basically, is what the sense that I got from this speech is like I don't know if he really thinks this or maybe it's just the calculation and trying to paint it in this way, but he seems to be presenting himself as the moral arbiter, and that the Democrats are completely immoral for what their views are, basically. But yeah, in this regard, like, it was not good for a lot of people, and they had to go to freaking food banks to get food. Like, it was not a good situation. And so he's talking about possibly declaring a national emergency. That there's been rumors, at least, about that. And the thing is, that makes no sense, like I've talked about, because if it wasn't an emergency, if you didn't declare emergency weeks ago, like, how could you declare one now just because you feel like it? It makes no sense. And also the legal challenges. Like, I mean, obviously, we have eminent domain, in the Constitution. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to pass the courts. I mean, people will fight it tooth and nail because you'll have to build the wall through some private property. So it's this idea that, like, we're just going to get the wall up as soon as possible. No, it's going to be tied up. It's not going to happen, overnight. So that even puts kind of the nail in the emergency argument coffin too, because it's like you're going to be so devoted to trying to do this. It's going to take months to get it through the courts, but it's like, meanwhile, where's the emergency? So and we'll talk more about the wall and immigration. That's what this whole little section is about, but it's very complicated. So in the speech, Trump again sought to sow fear over the thousands of Central Americans who have fled poverty and violence in their countries in recent months, many making their way to the U.S. border to apply for asylum. Now, the way it's always worked in this country up until Trump, you have to be in the U.S. to apply for asylum. You have to be at a port of entry, and I believe that is probably still the law. You still have to be at a port of entry. And this is regardless of whether you enter the country illegally or not. The thing that Trump is changing, though, is because it's fairly easy to apply for asylum. The problem is it doesn't always get passed, and if you don't reach the qualifications, then you get deported. But Trump is changing the process so that most migrants before, they would have a U.S. sponsor, and they would live in the U.S. during the time that their asylum was being certified. But now Trump is trying to make it so that they have to wait in Mexico, which, first of all, let's point out, like, it's very odd to legislate something where it's like we're going to force another country to do this. Like we're doing this unilaterally. It's not as if we went through the UN or some kind of international body. Like we're just forcing Mexico to do this. So that has issues with sovereignty. But the real problem is that he's having them wait in Mexico on these border cities where a lot of the gang violence is there, and it's very pervasive. So they're fleeing dire situations, a lot of these people, Central Americans, and Trump is putting them right back in the same circumstances a lot of the times. And this is by design, a lot of people have pointed out. They think that it's going to deter people from trying to get into the U.S., if not, like, going to actually apply for asylum. Like, once they do and they have to wait in Mexico, it could be months, maybe even a year before they get the yes or no on asylum. So a lot of them will just be like, if I have to live in this gang violence anyways, I'll just go back home. So that's immoral. I mean, let's take the legal aspect out of it. If you're someone who considers yourself a Christian and you look at what's going on at the border, like I don't get how you can consider yourself consistent in your beliefs, because you're purposely putting people in dire situations when they don't have to be, because this is not the way it's worked before. We know that they can wait in this country. They have a U.S. sponsor. It's not people act like it's a big deal, and people on the right, I should say, and they just generalize and demonize illegal immigrants and make them look like they're all violent criminals, but that's not the case. A lot of them are fleeing drug violence, so quite the opposite. And then he talked about judicial nominees, and this kind of ties in with the immigration thing because, let me just go back 1 second. He said that he's sending more troops to the border. What we should really be doing is sending caseworkers down to get these cases going, because it's backlogged. It's backlogged because so many people are trying to apply. It's like in the 4,000. I think it was just 4,000 this year, and that goes to immigration being at a 20-year low. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. So get the caseworkers down there and judges, because they're backlogged because they have to hear so many of these cases. And also, let me just point out real quick again, like, the reason why they're so backlogged now is because there's a zero tolerance policy in effect. So basically, they're going after anyone who's crossed illegally, no matter what, even if it was your first time. And I guarantee, like, a lot of these people, they're Central Americans and they're walking up to the border. A lot of them probably are first timers. So, I mean, to have this zero tolerance policy, like you're purposely making this process slow and arduous, which, Trump will then go and complain like, oh, the courts take so long. Well, you're the one that's making the problem, because you're making the standards so much more strict. But he's talked about judicial nominees, saying like, oh, we got to confirm these people. And he's acting like it's, like the obstructionist Democrats that are the problem. Like, we got to get this done. But, quite the contrary here. Schumer helped get a lot of nominees through. Like, he fast-tracked it. Like, it wasn't as if he put up a fight at all. He said, let's fast-track this because we want to go home and campaign. This was back during the midterms. So, like, again, completely opposite is true. Like, it's not as if the Democrats were putting up a fight at all. They were going right along with the judicial nominations, not even doing anything to stop it. They were openly saying, like, yeah, pass it, let's go, and then we can go and campaign, is what their excuse was. Oh, and then so U.S. role in the drug war. This is, um, a lot of the reasons why there's a lot of drug violence in Central America and in Mexico. A lot of the reasons why people are fleeing because it's so horrible is because we're waging the war on drugs, and we've been doing this for decades. I mean, just look at our history with intervening in South and Central America. We've been involved in there for over 50 years now, like ever since the CIA was around. So we talk about Russian interference all the time, but like we're interfering there, putting in dictators, and this is what we used to do. Like we would install dictators, and we'll get to Venezuela in a second. But the main point is they're fleeing the violence, and we're largely to blame for why they're in the situation they're in. Because if we didn't have the war on drugs, you wouldn't have these cartels be as powerful. That's just the facts. Look at prohibition in this country when we outlawed alcohol. The mafia got super powerful, and as a result of that, crime skyrocketed. So we really need to approach this war on drugs more cleverly. And I wouldn't even wait. I wouldn't even call it a war on drugs. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I'm like on board with full legalization of like all drugs and all that. Like that might be a little bit too far. I'm a little bit more open to certain things along those lines, like maybe decriminalization. But like we're way too hawkish, way too authoritarian with this war on drugs, and this is why we're causing so much violence. Um, so he repeated his claim that tens and thousands of Americans are killed by lethal drugs that cross our border and flood into our cities, including meth, heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl. Despite Trump's comments, recent statistics. I cannot speak. There's certain words I cannot say. Do you know this? Statistics. Okay. Show that irregular immigration has dropped to a 20-year low, and that many drug shipments are likely smuggled through official ports of entry. So, first point quick, irregular immigration has dropped to a 20-year low. It's been like net negative. It's been at a low for a long time. So this idea that like there's illegal immigrants like pouring through the border like crazy, the southern border, like it's not true. Most illegal immigrants, they're overstaying their visas. Like I said before, they come here by plane and they overstay their visas. This is how most of them come here, and it's in my view, we need to make the system more efficient. We shouldn't be trying to round people up and kick them out. I think that's immoral. That's not how a government should operate. It's akin to Nazi Germany, honestly. So I think we need a more humane system, something that's more efficient to get people their citizenship. And you can have ways to regulate it. I'm not saying we give everyone citizenship. If you have a violent record, yeah, I'm fine with deporting you, in my view, or putting you in jail, we could say. But yeah, I think that is the way to go about the problem. And so with the drug thing, though, they say most of them are smuggled through official ports of entry. I read an article recently where the biggest drug bust ever on the border just happened recently with Customs and Border Protection. They got, just a lot of drugs, a lot of meth and cocaine. And they had the picture, and it was the largest drug bust on the border. It was at a legal port of entry. So, building the wall, in terms of solving that problem, it's not going to. And I even said with the illegal immigrants, same thing. Most of them are flying here by plane and overstaying their visas. So it is the big objection is that this wall is unnecessary. It is racist in nature because you're trying to lump all legal immigrants into this violent criminal category, but it's just ineffective at what you want it to do anyways. So that's why we're against it. And also conservatives, they claim to hate big government, except they're acting super authoritarian, trying to push this thing. We're possibly talking about declaring a national emergency. Like, this is big government all day long. Like, and you couldn't get it passed in Congress the way it's supposed to work, a representative democracy where we elect people to go and represent us in Congress. You had majority in the House, majority in the Senate, before the midterms, that is, and you couldn't get it passed. So that's how it works. I don't know what else to say. Like, you couldn't get it done. So he also alleged that countless Americans were killed by criminal illegal aliens, although several studies show that both documented and undocumented immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than U.S.-born individuals. Again, it flies in the face of the stereotypes that he's painting. He even talked about how they're overcrowding our social safety nets, and that's not true. Like, the implication is they take benefits away from other people, but that's not true because they pay into Social Security and they don't get those benefits back. They can't get real health care. They can go to an emergency room, but that's not going to suffice. They're not going in there for a checkup or anything that's not an emergency. Like, they get less benefits as illegal immigrants, except the right has it completely backwards. They make it look like the illegal immigrants, they get everything for free, but that's not true. Then we talk about wages, and of course, Trump talked a lot about the economy and tried to bolster it as much as possible. Now, just generally, a lot of these trends we've been seeing under Obama. It's a continuation of the trend. So, I'm not necessarily trying to take credit away from Trump by saying that. I'm not saying his policies led to that, because I don't agree with his policies. And like I say, we've been seeing these trends before him. But that's not. I'm not trying to say like Trump he's wrong on the policy, on his economic policy, but he's not wrong to talk about how good the economy is doing on paper. Like, that's what it is showing, but the problem is that doesn't show the whole picture. And I'll get into that. So let's read this from the Washington Post. Wages rose 3.1% from December 2017 to December 2018, according to the Labor Department's Employment Cost Index for civilian workers, a widely watched measure of pay that does not take inflation into account. That is the biggest increase not adjusted for inflation since the year that ended in December 2008. But adjusted for inflation, wages for all workers grew 1.3% from December 2017 to December 2018, making the increase only the largest since August 2016, according to the Labor Department. It's worth noting that although real wage gains were higher in 2015 and 2016, that was a period of almost no inflation. So he can claim some credit for decent real wage growth now, with inflation back at about 2%. The Economic Policy Institute, a left-leaning think tank, says that nominal wage growth has been below a 3.5% target during the recovery, but the White House argued that traditional economic measures do not fully capture increases in compensation, such as bonuses, and so real wages have actually increased even more than shown in the economic data. So with that last point, that's their argument. Like, that's what their opinion is, essentially. And maybe that's true in certain cases, but you have to look at whether the companies are actually reinvesting in their workers and not just pocketing the extra cash. So it is a case-by-case basis. So the big picture really is that inequality is still a big problem in this country. And actually, it's probably worse under Trump than it has been in a while, because just look at the tax bill that he passed. Massive giveaways to the ultra wealthy, and the middle class, they get crumbs. It's like he talks about middle class tax cuts, but 80% of that tax bill, the benefits went to the 1%. So it's like, I don't want to hear you talk about being the champion of the middle class when we're talking about minuscule crumbs here compared to what you gave to the rich. And, that's important. It's trickle down economics 101. So you can't like cut taxes across the board and expect like revenue for the government to go up. Like that's what the whole line of thinking with that is. It just makes no sense. And also the tax bill incentivized outsourcing, which I didn't know until recently. And so on the issue of trade, on the rhetoric, Trump is correct because he talks about, we have to get out of these trade deals, and these are problems for our economy, basically. I believe that is the case. The problem is, though, Trump on policy with trade is not good. The tariffs that he's done, they've been doing more harm than good. And it is case by case with that. I'll stipulate that because if you actually go and look at certain examples, it is to a degree positive, but for some people, no, it's not positive. But largely on trade, like, Trump is not good. 93,000 jobs were outsourced under just his first year, and that was higher than the average of the last 5 years under Obama. So higher than his average over 5 years. His renegotiation of NAFTA still had a lot of very bad provisions in it. Big Pharma was given advantages. They were protected from generic competition. Oil companies convinced the White House to keep provisions of the old NAFTA that would give them lower taxes. Takes a provision right out of TPP, which gives corporations a big advantage. If a government passed regulations that cut into their profits, they can sue, and they have a system in place for this. And the biggest industries, such as oil and gas and telecommunications, have an advantage because they will have a say over who gets onto this board, the ISDS, that would oversee these cases. And this is bad for pollution because, let's say, for example, you have an oil company that is operating in a foreign country. Let's say it's Venezuela, just for example's sake. If Venezuela has laws that say like you can't pollute this water or this body of water somewhere, if they were in the trade deal, that is. So I don't know if Venezuela is, but regardless, let's just say they are. If they're in this deal, that the corporation can sue the government because of regulations that cut into their profits. And it's like a corporate board. This is, they choose these people because they know that they're going to do the corporation's bidding. And this is why TPP was so bad. So this is a bad provision of TPP that found its way into the new NAFTA. And Trump on the campaign trail talked about how, TPP is so bad and free trade is so bad. But really, it's more of the same, and maybe even worse, because you're giving corporations a lot more power than they used to. So, again, it's just not, it's really typical, I guess, of politicians. They run on one thing and then they completely flip. No, I mean, Obama didn't completely flip. He just was more centrist than I would have wanted. But the thing with Trump too is that he's like everything. He'll be everything at once. Like in the span of just a minute, he'll say contradictory policy views. I think ultimately Trump doesn't really have an ideology, and his advisors, they tell him what's the best thing when it comes to free trade, and that's what happens. And I'm not trying to say that there's no good provisions in the new trade deal. There are, actually. For farmers, a lot of good things were in there, but there was a lot of bad, and I think it's worth pointing that out. And in the fact that we're outsourcing a lot of jobs. So, I don't think there's a big plan to, reinvigorate U.S. manufacturing in this country. Because I haven't heard any specific things. Like, I've heard Trump say that we're doing that, but I haven't seen much evidence of that. and that's just the way it is. When you look at the reality on the ground, it's it's not doing what Trump says it is, and also to the degree that it even is. Like when it comes to fossil fuels, we should be doing green energy. We need to be investing in those jobs, like the Green New Deal. Um, and one quick point on that before I go to Venezuela and socialism, but it pisses me off, really does, because I was watching Tucker Carlson before the State of the Union, and he's talking about he's like all paranoid and afraid. He's like, I was like, we're gonna transition off fossil fuels in the next 12 years. This is just ridiculous. What are we gonna do to our economy? So, look, if the resources, if the government wants the resources to be there to reinvest in renewables, we can do it. It's it's just a matter of the will of who wields the power over our Washington politicians, and we know that the corporations do. They buy them off. So the oil and gas industry, they have one of the biggest influences uh, over our government. So that's ultimately what it comes down to: is who has the money and who has the power to influence people. And the green energy lobby, it's just not a big lobby. I mean, it does exist to a degree. We get renewable subsidies. We give those to renewable energy companies. I assume for research and development. Just trying to further green technology, but it's crumbs compared to what we give to fossil fuels. So we need to realign our priorities. It's a matter of will. It's a matter of, are the people in the government going to make that a leading issue? Are they going to make that a priority to try and switch us to renewable energies in 12 years? It's not a matter of like is it possible? Like if the resources, if the leaders want the resources to be there, they can be there. So Trump, probably the thing that he said that got the most attention was that he said America will never be a socialist country. Now, obviously he's talking about Venezuela and that kind of socialism. But nonetheless, let me, be nitpicky and parse this out. We are, to a degree, a socialist country already. Every modern country is a mixed economy, a mix of socialism and capitalism. We just happen to be way more, far right authoritarian. We're on the capitalist side, much heavier than a lot of other modern countries in Europe, as and Australia. One example, like they're all mixed economies. They just a lot of these other countries have stronger social safety nets than we do. Um, so, but even to what Trump is talking about, like we're never going to be like Venezuela. No one on the far left in this country, and by far left, I would have to assume Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, that they're in that, because they're as far left as you get, really, in terms of our politicians. They're international centrists, but this is what we have in our country as the far left. They're not advocating for Maduro or Venezuelan style socialism. They ignore when we point to social democracies in Europe, as I was saying, and they just keep screaming Venezuela because they have no real argument against the left's policy proposals. I don't know if they know this, but I mean, the Green New Deal, Medicare for All, like these are all very, very popular ideas when you poll the American people. 70% support Green New Deal. Around that same number, maybe even close to 75% support Medicare for All. So there's no argument against it. They just want to fearmonger and say that we're going to turn into Venezuela, but that's ridiculous. We're not saying that. We're pointing to real examples in the real world where we have social democracy. So, that argument just makes no sense. But I guess to some people it does resonate. Um, so, as I said, they're overwhelmingly popular. Um, every other modern country has some form of, or another of single payer. And so the question I would like to ask Trump or any Trump supporter or conservative is, do you think America is not great enough to have universal health care? Because literally, as I was just saying, every other modern country has it. So the right wingers say, like, we can't do this. So, I mean, maybe it's a nothing point, but I think that's, their slogan, right? It's something that they seem to care about, like making America great and America first, like we're gonna make ourselves like so incredible, whatever whatever that means. Like for them, that means basically white ethno state. But regardless, um, it just doesn't make sense to me how there's this disconnect because every other country has this and we don't, and somehow we can't do it, but also we're the best. It doesn't really make much sense. So as far as Venezuela goes with our foreign policy, Trump and his administration are enabling a coup. So he tweeted out. I mean, Trump did this via tweet, which that in itself should raise red flags. It's like you're doing this based on a temper tantrum, probably. Is it a real policy? And also, even if it was coordinated, even if it was premeditated, like I don't think you should be declaring presidents of foreign countries on Twitter. Like that's where I draw the line, man. Um, so, and we're meddling in another country's affairs. Like we talk about Russia meddling in our election. Like this far exceeds that. We're basically declaring the president of Venezuela, Maduro, he doesn't count anymore, and now this guy is the interim president. Um, that breaks international law. Um, so I just it makes no sense how people could even be slightly okay with this, because again, I'm not defending Maduro. I'm aware that he is very corrupt and brutal to his opposition. I've looked into that. I'm not denying that. He hoards the wealth of the Venezuelan oil companies, like he nationalizes these companies, but then he hoards the wealth for him and his military cronies. So the Venezuelan people, like they suffer as a result. So I'm not defending Maduro. What I'm saying is the precedent of us doing regime change to a country unilaterally, and just um, crippling the country in such a way, because our sanctions on Venezuela are having a big impact on how the regular people in Venezuela are doing too, because we deny a lot of humanitarian aid a lot of the times. We did this in Iran. Um, and if you just cripple these countries with so much sanctions, you have to know as an impact of that the people are going to suffer. If you're talking about the oil companies for Venezuela, like that's the core of their economy. So again, I'm not defending Maduro, but you have to know that doing those sanctions has that effect. Except we turn around, we know that the sanctions will have that effect, at least people in government know that, and then we turn around and say, oh, Maduro's so bad, look at his people suffering. Well, yeah, Maduro has blame, but we have blame too for this, because we know that we're crippling their country by doing this. It's not deniable. Um, Also, another important point, like there's a lot of circumstantial evidence to suggest that we're doing this to gain better control of the oil reserves. Venezuela has the biggest oil reserves in the world. And so there's lots of comments, videos of Trump commenting on how we should get the oil, we should take it from Iraq, and it's like if we're in the war, like the victor goes the spoils. So, and then also John Bolton, like this was recently, was on TV and said, like getting control of that oil would be good for the U.S. economy. Like that's giving up the ghost right there. Like you're saying what you're motivation is for this. And no, that's not good because what we're potentially talking about is installing a leader in Venezuela that will not necessarily be better for the Venezuelan people, maybe marginally so, which, that matters, but in terms of getting them into a better economic place and not being, starving on the street, like it may not help with that because we may just take the profits of that oil. Like Maduro is hoarding that wealth for him and his Politico friends. Like they're wealthy in Venezuela, the elite class, but we're trying to gain control of that. So in the process of that, are we going to think of the Venezuelan people and think like, oh, we should let them share in this wealth? I don't know. What I can tell you is I don't trust our administration. I don't trust our record when it comes to this because we just a lot of times take the oil. We take the fossil fuels, and then Trump is like bragging that like this is a good thing that we do that. Um, so final thing, a reporter went to Washington to ask people from Congress about what we're doing in Venezuela, and a lot of the responses were just not good. I mean, even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she basically said like we're working on a response, but like this is so easy to look at and understand that we shouldn't be doing this. Like you don't have to defend Maduro at all. Like I've just said, I understand maybe to a degree they don't want to be smeared as saying anything positive about Venezuela because like they're always smeared as like, oh, you want Venezuelan socialism, you want this country to turn into Venezuela, so they don't want to be seen saying anything kind of positive in that way, or undermining our actions in favor of Maduro, at least on the surface, being against taking him out of power. But it's like being against taking him out of power does not mean you're de facto aligned with him. Like I don't like Putin, but does that mean I think we should overthrow Putin? Like it just makes no sense. We're talking about a sovereign government here. We can't just go in unilaterally and do these things. But a lot of these responses from the congressman were not good. I mean, one guy gave actually a pretty good response, and then the reporter asked him, "Are you going to speak up about this issue?" And he's like, "I'm in financial services." Like, you're in Congress. You're there to represent us on all the issues, not just financial stuff. It's like if you're in a committee or something, like that's the only issue that you're gonna care about. Like, no, 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 no. But things are crazy, and it's a lot like the lead up to the Iraq War, where people would say that like, oh, you're sympathizing with Saddam because you don't want us to invade Iraq. Well, no, I think we should take a step back and think, do we want to get involved, maybe not in another war, but another conflict with another foreign country when Flint doesn't have clean water, when we have a crumbling infrastructure, when we have lots of problems with inequality here in this country, and we're talking about making lives better for Venezuelans. I'm not saying we should have no say in doing that and trying to get Venezuelans to a better place, but let's focus on our country too. Let's try and make lives better for people in this country. But that's, in my view, used as an excuse. Like, it's like, oh, we care about the Venezuelans. Trump, like, you don't care about Americans. So let's nail it down to the facts and show that your policies are actually very harmful to the country.